Welcome to the One Spark at a Time with me, Rabbi Adam Miller. A Jewish mystical legend tells that during creation, something broke and shattered, scattering sparks of divine holiness around the world. It is our responsibility to do acts of tikkun olam, to repair the world around us. Each time we do a good deed, we are gathering one more of those sparks, making the world a little more whole and holy. Today, we will meet an individual doing this sacred work of repairing the world, one spark at a time. My friend Randy Antik lives full-time here in Naples, Florida, and is the Chief Executive Officer for Searching for Solutions Institute, a 501c3 public foundation that was established in 2007. Born in New York City, having lived in Mexico City and Southern California, Randy got his education on the East Coast at Colby College and Harvard Business School, and has here in Florida brought us the innovative Imagine Solutions Conference. We're excited to talk with him today about how this is impacting our community and the work that it's doing to repair our world. Randy, welcome to the One Spark at a Time show.
Adam, thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Well, it's a delight to see you. We don't get to see many people in person these days, so it's great to get to see you in this format. How are things with you?
By the way, this is our new in-person.
Zoom person.
You know what? We did our final conference at the end of February, not even thinking about what this world would be like right now. And, a week later, the world bingo changed. And so therefore, what we've done is say, okay, how are we going to be as active and proficient in whatever these series of new chapters are? And we're starting to get there. I think the first couple of weeks, everybody was a little bit in chaos.
I can understand the chaos and a lot of efforts to rethink and revision how it is we operate in this new world. But before we get to today, let's go back a little bit and talk about what brought you to this place. Thinking about organizing thought leaders, creating think tanks, that was probably not on the list for career day when you were a kid. Tell us, how did your professional career begin?
I think the headline is I flunked retirement. So, but almost all things that you are passionately doing in your current life come from something that you experienced or believed or were passed on to you in some way, however you verbalize it or however you are able to consciously know that that's happening. And in my case, I very much respect and value the education that I've been able to have, and that for all my family and others. So that was a core thing. So I have always had a great deal of value and care about the idea, could you educate? And that became a driver. So in my professional life, i.e. after school, I did a number of things in business, but in parallel to that, I found that I was doing things or going to conferences as a way to kind of just tweak my mind or learn about something new that had nothing to do with what I might do back at the office or whatever company I was involved with. So I've been going to TED for 25 years. I've been going to the Aspen Institute for 22 and several others like that. Quite honestly, not ever thinking that might be a kind of a foundation block for what you might do if you flunk retirement. So when we moved down here to build a house, to retire, and enjoy Naples and Southwest Florida like the majority of people that do that. But at the same time, I've always been very active in a number of philanthropic things. And one of the things that was on my mind at this time, and maybe it's age appropriate, was a sense of, and when I would have this conversation with someone like yourself, you'd all nod your head yes. And the sense is, there's a growing group of underserved, underutilized private sector leaders. If we could get them involved in critical issues, we might make a difference. That's a long sentence, but everybody nods their head yes. So it wasn't a debatable thing. And so then the question becomes, what do you need to do to either attract that group or to kind of to take the first steps? And because I've been going for years to TED and to Aspen, I reached out to them because I thought maybe the first step is how do you learn about something? Because, Adam, I'm sure you've seen this in what you do, and people that are listening in do the same thing. If you don't know something about healthcare or education or something, you tend not to be as passionate and want to get involved. That's just a normal thing. And so therefore, how do we then create some kind of educational or sharing experience. And we were very fortunate. When I started talking to some people down here who I just met when we were coming down, they agreed and said, hey, listen, we'll get behind you. Well, I said, well, then we need to create some kind of a public foundation so people won't accuse us of doing this for other reasons.
So you found people who shared that passion for education. Was that something when you were so passionate in your work and going to those different conferences, how was that received at the time? I know today it's easy for you to say education is the core foundation. Were others as open to the idea of going outside of your field and learning and trying to glean understanding from others?
Are you talking about the people who went to fund this or the people that have come to the conference?
I'm talking about early in your career. You talked about going to TED and to Aspen and other things. Were other people at first as on board with the concept of learning outside of your discipline, so to speak, not just going to a professional conference, but going to hear people talk about things that weren't really directly applicable, but yet there were so many lessons to be learned?
So here's a question that I ask, and I would ask the people that are tuning in to you and yourself. And that's a very simple one. Each of us can remember or point out or even remember the name and maybe the time of some teacher, professor, or someone in education that really had an impact on you. It was a great course or something happened in that experience that you just don't forget. I mean, it literally could be from the first grade all the way through graduate school. You don't know exactly when that happens. But the reason I say that sticks with you. It might be in your subconscious, but it really becomes a part of who you are. What I'm saying is that means that things like that are meaningful. So the question then becomes, could you create something like that in a conference? Could you create those kinds of teachers, those kinds of people sharing? And when you say that, no one says no. They all say yes. What is typical, and you know this and others know this, someone has to kind of get a ball rolling.
Mm-hmm.
There's people that will say yes, but they're sitting in the second row in your temple waiting for someone to stand up and say, okay, next Thursday we'll do our first one. And
so was there a person who stood up and was there for you to help spark this idea locally?
Well, certainly another one of the seasonal people, Tom Everest, who comes out of South Dakota, got this right away and said, listen, I'll get behind it. And he had a lot of resources. But the second thing we did is said, look, we don't know this community. This could be a really bad idea. So why don't we talk to some local people just to listen? So we got a meeting very early on with a fellow by the name of David Lucas. And for those of you who go back 10 or 12 years, he was a very meaningful developer in this town as it developed. Bonita Bay, Mediterra, a number of others. He stopped our meeting in 3 minutes and said, this would be good for this town. What do you want to do? Well, guess what? You don't need to talk anymore. You need to figure out what to do. He then introduced us to several other old families, ones that people know or know of, the Colliers, Lutgert, et cetera. And they all said the same thing. This could be good for this town. What they're looking for, this is a good idea. Are you going to do it? So I then had to say, I'll raise my hand, and yes, I'll do this. What we didn't know is what the experience level was of anybody here in terms of taking time out during, in essence, season to spend a part of a day or 2 days listening to people that in some cases they probably never heard of. But and Adam, I know you've come at least 3 or 4 times. It's always after the fact you say, wow, that was an amazing person. But you didn't necessarily know who that was. What it is it was that great teacher that you had sometime early in your life. And so, we started out.
What did it look like? What did that first run through of Imagine Solutions look like? That's the conference that eventually developed out of this. What did it look like in those early stages?
Well, I begged, borrowed, and stealed because I've had a long history with TED and Aspen, and they were helpful. I went to them and basically used those connections and got introduced to a number of people who had spoken in some previous time. So we were chock full of big names that if you were in the world of TED or Milken or Aspen or World Economic, these people had spoken there. So that meant Naples or Southwest Florida suddenly had something they never had before. Now, whether they know that or not, I don't know. That's a different issue. But well, here's what's interesting. Myra Daniels had an early meeting with us. Those of you who know Myra Daniels know that it can go one of two ways. It can very easily go where she makes it very clear she's not interested in a very dynamic, dramatic way. And to a lesser few, she gets behind that. And that's a well-known personality for her. We got introduced to her. I did not know her from a hill of beans. She spent the first 20 minutes in our meeting making it clear to us that the Aspen Institute's days were over. It was absolutely no. How do you say to someone like that you're wrong? I go to it every year and it's just booming. So when she stopped, David Lucas looks at me, I look at him, and I said, can I make a couple comments? Whatever I said, she spun on a dime. And she said, this could be good for this community, because part of her head and heart is very much that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that gave me the opening, and I said, we would like 2 days of your concert hall in high season. Ooh, that's not easy. What do you want? I said, we want it in February. That really got tough. Because if you go back to any of you who live here, February is about as busy as we get.
Yeah, for those who are listening who might not be in Southwest Florida, season is from January till April, when our population triples and activities fill the calendar. So this is really a tough ask to come to her and say, we'd like the largest concert hall available for us during your biggest part of the year.
And she gave it to us. She also said in that meeting, I'm going to attend your first event and I'm going to be watching you. That's all she had to say. I'm watching you. And those of you who know her know she's about 5'1". She's a dynamo, but that power can explode in many different ways. She sat halfway back in the hall, and about noontime the first day, she starts waving her hand up in the air to call me over. And I'm thinking about a lot of other things than that. I go over not knowing what she's going to say. She said, this is a lot better than I thought. We should do this. So that's how we started.
Wow.
And what you do is you build it off of people like that. You build it off of Adam Miller's. You build it off of Myra's. You build it off of, because that's the way any of these kind of concepts start.
Well, I don't know that I belong in that same sentence as Myra Daniels. Very different levels of engagement and influence in the area. But one of the things that strikes me is Southwest Florida is a place that attracts such a geographically diverse population. As you mentioned, a myriad of past professionals looking to transition to new stages of life. I think the phrase I've heard others use is an intellectual petri dish of opportunity. How did that background impact or influence your decision to start this here?
I would add a couple words to that sentence. I would add that it's an unfilled petri dish of intellectual activity. Because if you look around the country to other places that do have things, whether they be the size of New York or others, you know, for the amount of wealth and the amount of whatever, it's the variety is not as deep and as broad as it could be. Remember, we're doing things that are kind of intellectually challenging or amazing or whatever. It is not just a person for the next hour playing a violin of a person you know well. It is a person sharing with you at the age of 12, they got involved in starting some kind of foundation and now have 20 million followers. Well, that's a hell of a story after the fact, but it's not one you would know before.
Mm-hmm.
But it really can add to your life. And so that started taking hold, and it's taken hold. We're now up to 650 people attend annually, and things happen out of that. Although our job is not our job is to educate, connect. Our job isn't to kick off funding or doing something. That comes from the leadership in the audience or the interesting ideas that can happen.
Educating the world makes such a difference, and you've proven that again and again. You shared that you've had the opportunity to be at Aspen and TED, and that's what helped bring some of those amazing innovators. As an attendee, I remember the young teenager who had developed the litmus test for cancer as one of those memorable presenters, and so many others. Who stands out for you over the years of Imagined Solutions as some of the people who really, you think, sparked change around them?
So let me share with something. Let me go back to the person you mentioned. He was 13 at the time. And so there's two pictures that all of you can kind of imagine. On the one hand, this was a 13-year-old with acne and all those kinds of things that happen in a 13-year-old kid. And when he started talking, he's talking like a PhD in biochemistry and respected by the top people at Johns Hopkins. So here you had one picture when you talked to him as a teenager, and another that he just won the Intel Science Prize. Those are amazing people. Those are wonderfully amazing people. So that's one. Time after time we've had, look at this in February, we had Larry Brilliant, who, those of you who know about him, he's done an incredible number of things, and it really impacted our audience. We brought the heads of 3 branches of the military, and they were a little scary in what they talked about, but boy, were they on top, talking about what do we need to do to address what our future is going to be. And things like that go on. We've had several times I brought a blind person who's doing unbelievably incredible things. A woman that had been educated in Germany, decided that she wanted to go to Tibet, could not get in there in an easy way, somehow rode a horse through the pass from Nepal to Tibet, finds out that the blind children in Tibet are not able to go to school because there's no Braille in Tibetan. So she takes it upon herself to create Braille in Tibetan. Wow. Now school for 500 blind children in Lhasa. I mean, these are amazing people that, however you want to look at it, didn't start with anything other than, I want to get something done. And that's worthwhile sharing with an audience that's capable of doing something.
Those stories are inspiring, and clearly they've impacted their community. Are there stories of people in our local area who have taken on transformational change out of attending or participating in some way in your programs?
Well, some you can't talk about because there's been funding done by private individuals that just doesn't, that always wants to stay private. But I mean, those of you who are local will know Jackie Pfaffer, and you will know that she's come to our conference every year, and she openly would tell you that there are people that she met at the conference from the stage and in conversation that end up being the major Kickstarter for what she's put together, which is really impacting this community. Cam Patton comes every year and brings 16 to 18 of her top teachers and principals, because there's things that they learn every year and things they can do that they try to impact in the schools. The heads of neighborhood health come, and we always do a lot of things in healthcare and medicine. And several times they asked me if I could introduce them to one of their key people, and they brought them down there, and things happened. Now, I cannot predict that that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Hope is you set the table well for that conversation to happen, with the belief that can happen if you do that. And it has. It has. By the way, I should add, and you know this, we are very clear about this. We do nothing in politics. And everybody can have an opinion about that, but what it really, as soon as you move into that sphere, you get into politicized conversations. And there's too many big issues that the private sector needs to know about and can provide some leadership to that's worthwhile talking about as is.
It's remarkable to see that kind of change happening, and to recognize the challenge in a politically diverse and polarized world of trying to find ways to bring people together to address these critical issues. I understand from our work together and our conversations how much relationships play a role in taking that education and really transforming it beyond the scope of just having imagined solutions and the speakers and the people who come to engage. How has the organization gone beyond just that one experience?
Well, our fundamental thesis and our strength is, can we do something that educates or connects? Okay. We underwrite 130 scholarships to nonprofit leaders because they should be involved in the conversation. And we're very clear about that to them. Here's the no-no. You can't ask for money during any of these events. What you can do is get into great conversations. And 99% of them respect that. And they come back year after year because it is a big benefit. Likewise, we attract an audience of very substantial, well-to-do people, and they should know each other. They should know each other in a comfortable environment, one that you're both there because you're learning. And that's turned out to do amazing things. We've then done a series, you know, we're a public foundation. And we've done a series of things that are kind of, let's call it behind the curtain. I met with Mike Martin, president of FGCU, and in that conversation, we learned that two of the leaders in Lee County, the head of the hospital, the head of the schools, had never met each other. They knew of each other, but never met. Well, guess what? I said, what would happen if I put together a lunch? I don't have to be there or not, and maybe there's some legal reasons to do it. Would you do that? That's now grown into 7 of the major leaders in Lee County meet once a quarter for lunch just to talk over things. You know, I'm sure you talked to, well, actually, let's go back to day one. When I came to you to propose an idea where we would do scholarships for you, you may remember some of the questions, but 2 of them were, would you give us feedback of those who attended, so we know, and would you introduce us to another pastor in another congregation to then get others involved?
Sure.
And guess what? That's now grown to 6 congregations, each have scholarship programs. And why? Because the leaders in your congregation are also leaders in this community.
And those relationships matter, and bringing those connections is how we address the problems that are going on. You mentioned having panels as part of the program and having the leaders of the military. I know from past experience, you've had a lot of medical panels. I know that there's so much going on right now in our world. How has some of what you've experienced through the conference or from the speakers shaped how you're seeing what's going on right now with the challenges that we're facing as a country?
Well, a challenge we're facing as a society maybe.
Sure.
However you want to describe what's happened or is happening, Clayton Christensen talks about disruption, and it's clearly usually disruptive. So if you say that's your starting point, then you say if disruption causes something, whatever it's going to be is liable to be different or new in some way. And given that, what I've said, what we as a foundation can do, if we're good at bringing big ideas or new thinking or cutting edge, would that be useful in the time of disruption? Not necessarily an answer, but kind of a roadmap to learning. Here's an example. If we talk to every single person that's on this today, and we went back to January, whether it was them or their kids or their grandkids, every single one was experiencing education in a specific way. We're all used to doing that. Adam, you're a parent, and you were doing that. Come March, that whole world changed, literally, without any experience, without any kind of previous way of knowing whether we're working on. And we're right now in that time period. If you look at this fall and next year, for sure we're going to be in that time period. We don't know exactly how it's going to evolve. We don't know exactly what's worked so far or what has to be done differently. So what have I done? Just an example. I reached out, was able to get to a woman by the name of Bridget Terry Long. Bridget Terry Long is the dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Education. That is the #1 ranked graduate school of education in the country. So in that role, she should have a point of view. And I asked her, because she agreed to come, would you be willing to kind of talk about what you see as the landscape come next February? She says, absolutely. She says, I may not have all the answers, but wouldn't it be good if you can start describing what some of the issues are in that new world? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And it's the power of education is there to help us respond to the disruption, to understand and learn and grow from what's there. With that in mind, how do you think challenges are going to be faced going forward?
Depends what you mean, but be more specific. Challenges is like, will the world exist? The answer is yes.
Well, how do you respond? I think as we're talking about education, how do you respond in a society right now where we seem to have a conflict between the political desire to see things done and what facts and scientific evidence might be showing? How can education help us overcome that perceived conflict that's occurring?
I think maybe what our role is, if we can have a role, is can we bring people of great merit, in other words, their peer group, recognize them as an outstanding expert, to talk about the facts and trends and direction. okay? Not to talk about the politics. If it enters into it, it enters in. But that's really not what our focus is. You may have to look at that as part of the picture that you have to address, but it's not the focus of our picture.
So a couple of questions coming in from our audience, and for those on Facebook, you can put questions up there. For those on the Zoom, you can put them into the Q&A tab. One question comes up asking, this sounds like it's been a very successful program here in Southwest Florida. Have you worked with anyone to try to bring this model to other communities?
Well, we created this as a community-focused model. And by the way, Aspen has been a collaborative partner, so they're very involved in helping us think through form, change this soft piece of clay. And it is a soft piece. From the beginning to today, there's things we are doing differently than we did on year one, because you just learn. You learn what the audience, how they can react, all those kinds of things. We were not prepared, and in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, we have gotten unsolicited calls from certain other communities that happen to be somewhat similar to us in terms of some kind of either seasonality or wealth or whatever, saying, would you be willing to help us? And my answer is, we will absolutely open our books to anybody and help that way, but we won't run it for you. We're full-time doing it here. So what you have to do is get an organization in your local area, whether it be called Palm Beach or Jackson Hole or Scottsdale, Arizona, or other communities like that, and that's up to you. And you need to get some kind of a community foundation involved, because what that does is help seed the community, because that's how you get there. The point of what I'm saying is we've had requests, and we're kind of in the process of what can we do on a one-by-one basis with a community that wants to do something.
And has anyone taken you up on it so far as starting their own initiatives?
Arizona has, and now they've called a timeout, but it makes sense right now. It's a timeout period.
A timeout makes a lot of sense right now.
Yeah.
So another question has come in wanting to know, of all the people you've wanted to have but haven't been able to, who is the great white whale? Who is it you'd like to have on your speaker panel but you haven't yet been able to land?
Well, here's a request I have in right now, and it's an unusual one. So think of outside the 9 dots. I would like to get Norman Lear on stage with Mel Brooks.
Huh. Okay.
And Carl Reiner. Wouldn't it be interesting to have Carl Reiner, Mel Brooks, and Norman Lear on stage together?
That would be a very interesting panel discussion.
And it may only happen once. So that's an example. Those are some things. Well, I'll give you another one, a completely different area. There is a person that is part-time here that's very involved in the Islamic community worldwide. And he's part of the very specific group in that world that's run by the Aga Khan. And, a lot of people won't know much about that, but that's, as you know, Adam, about a 40 million group of people out of Africa and whatever. And it's kind of more of an educated group. I think it would be interesting to get the Aga Khan to come here to give some kind of perspective on things, just because it's going to be very different than anything we've experienced. Does that make sense?
So it sounds like it's bringing in those opportunities for people to see things they would never have an opportunity to engage with ever in any other setting.
Right. Exactly right. Exactly right. I go to Europe every year for the Skoll conference. I've been very fortunate that Jeff Skoll has invited us, and we brought a bunch of Skoll awardees every year. And and he gets incredibly different people. And one year I met Desmond Tutu. Well, whether you like it or not, that person has been in the middle of making history. Okay? Somehow that's worthwhile sharing. Haven't gotten him yet.
He's also on that list of possible gets for the future. Okay.
Possible.
So can you share with us what the theme, someone wants to know if you'll share with us if there's an overriding or overarching theme this year for the upcoming conference in 2021?
What we're working on right now, or what we're in the process, and the content then is trying to fill that, is I'm calling it connecting the dots. If you look at what this disruption is, it's going to impact all sorts of different parts of our society. Each of them has their own behavior or newness or change. What's an example? Education, I just gave you. That's a good example. Finance could be an example. Surprisingly enough, the military could be an example. Go on and on and on. Now, we can't cover everything, but what would happen if we could present 6, 7, 8 things that each of them are a part of how you connect the dots in a new society?
So it's
on our way there.
So it's helping people reconnect the dots in a new world.
Well, here's an example. I think I showed you education. I've gotten a commitment from a fellow by the name of John Richardson, who just retired as a 4-star admiral, and he was the CNO, which is the Chief Naval Officer of the U.S. Navy. Okay, that means he was the person in charge of running the Navy. Okay, we don't think about this, but the Navy is going to have to prepare and operate very differently coming out of this than anything they've ever done before. What's an example? 4,000 people on an aircraft carrier. We take that for granted. You know, if you're running the Navy, this could be a very different challenge.
Sure.
How you strategize, how you get ready is different. Well, I think those are worthwhile things to kind of build up an understanding. Because this could, by the way, going to happen across all the military. It's going to happen all across education. It's going to happen all across X, Y, or Z.
A lot of us are going to have to change our paradigms and the way that we operate, and that will be a great challenge. And education is what's going to help us move forward. Another question for you, Randy: what keeps you up at night? What are the issues you talk about wanting to address? Critical issues. What are some of the things that you want to see addressed and that are keeping you up at night?
You know, I have to think about that. I'm pretty good at going to sleep, and I something from Norman Lear. Norman Lear wrote a book that turns out there's some interesting stuff coming out of it. And one of the things he said, he's 97 years old. He said, I go to sleep every night thinking, what do I want to do tomorrow? So he always has something he wants to do. And that kind of drives me. You know, right now we are preparing content, but we also have to look at, could it be in person or virtual or a combination? Well, look at, here's a good example. The virtual world for all of us is very new stuff, very new. And everybody kind of takes it for granted that we're on a screen, but there's an underbelly of technology. There's an underbelly of things that all are new things. So for example, if this thing started to glitch and we froze on the screen, everybody watching this would say, this is a lousy experience. Well, oddly enough, you need to learn about all those things. You need, you know, and if you were to ask me what keeps me up at night, learning how to do a great job in a virtual world is a valid new issue.
I can understand that. It's definitely been a learning curve for all of us as we've adapted to this. And another question has come in wanting to know along these lines, what about the digital divide? We take for granted the technology that's linking us together today and that allows a lot of people who have resources to stay connected and stay engaged. But there seems to be a digital divide that's growing in our society. What can you say to that piece of it?
Well, first of all, one way to talk about this is in our country. Another way to talk about this is around the world. Mm-hmm. And I think that we are capable of addressing everything around the world. In fact, we've made it very clear. We can't be everything to everybody. So if, for instance, if you were to want to address Africa, that's a very specific area that has very different issues relative to digital participation. On the one hand, it's probably ahead in being able to provide cell phones as a way of communicating. On the other hand, their ability to have a laptop, a computer, or anything else that gets into education is somewhere between doesn't exist to something. Yeah. That's probably not as true here as we think it is, because we are at the point where in the high 90s of everybody somehow being connected. Now, and I'm not the expert on that. But if you were to go to that, that's happening very fast. And it's also, I mean, if you look at like the schools that have had to pivot and go to online learning, it's turned out that there weren't that many places that couldn't happen. That doesn't mean it doesn't have to be addressed, but it's not like 40% isn't happening. It's 2, 3, or 4. And probably and therefore it's being addressed. I don't think it's been solved, but it's being addressed.
Yeah. I know locally, I think reflecting on that question that came in, it's seeing things like in different school districts where they passed out laptops and gave resources to families who didn't or otherwise have them. They might have had the technology, the cell phone technology, but to be able to learn is a different level of need. I think that's where they're aiming. And I think you answered in part that we're growing the technology, but we still have a ways to go so that everyone can have full access to what it is that's being offered out there.
And by the way, it has to be as easy as you putting your key in the car engine and turning and it starts on. And it's not there today. And everybody knows that.
Right.
But that's just what it is. I mean, go to an Apple store, and I'm 76, and have that 35-year-old talk to you and kind of imply how dumb you are compared to them zipping through all their different things. And that's where we are in that world. And, okay, we will get there, but...
There's a lot behind that title of genius bar when you walk into the Apple store and the way that you might feel with the technology. I think back to 30 years ago, having an Apple IIe in my house, and that was a big deal for people to have a computer in their home, and how far we've come in that short period. It's only going to continue. So I can appreciate where the technology goes. Bringing us back and wanting to get your insights, we really appreciate you taking the time, Randy, to share with us how education can be a spark for addressing the problems we see in the world. If someone were to come to you and say, Randy, what's the lesson you can share with me? I want to make the world a better place. I see the problems that are out there. What would you share with that person?
That's a big, I think it never hurts to be passionate, because you have to be passionate as you go through the ups and downs of whatever you want to do getting there. And sometimes you have to think about what could the end game be. The end game is, can I create a community of X that likes this, gives you feedback, and helps you get X plus? And think that way, because when it's all said and done, no matter what you want to do in some change, it's going to take some kind of people, okay? And I think you ought to always be listening to figuring out how to connect, relate, and get those kinds of people involved, because they become your advocates. They become, the marching band. They become all those things. But I also think the ups and downs. Look, go. You have a temple. If you want to build a new building, you have to get a certain number of people believing in that, called leadership. They in turn help get the word out to, in essence, get something like that done. Well, that same thing is true in anything you start. Okay, we've been very fortunate in being able to create lots of relationships for content. Now what we have to do is do a good job of getting that across to people who care about it and people who don't know about it.
It's a beautiful way for us to bring this together, Randy, that message of passion. Find something you're passionate about and be able to share that passion with others. Well, I appreciate so much you taking the time, my friend, to be here with me today and to share your passion for education, for sharing the learning with others, and believing that through education we can change our world. I really appreciated our conversation today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. One of the things we've been doing during One Spark sessions is recognizing that during this time of COVID-19, we have an awareness of our blessings as well as a heightened sensitivity for those who are in need around us. So each session we pause to highlight opportunities to volunteer, give back, or help others during this time in our area. I don't know if there's any organizations that you're in contact with that you wanted to share opportunities for our listeners to maybe make a difference.
Well, we have the heads of both the community foundations are on our board, and they would tell you that the whole nonprofit world, however you want to define it, from young people to old, from disadvantaged this way, we need to be aware of and be aware. And there's nothing wrong. Pick what area is important to you and figure out how you can best be, supportive to it, is kind of what I would say.
Wonderful. I think that's true of all of those nonprofit organizations and all the work that needs to be done in the community. I'd want to add one other highlight, which is I know that for many in our Southwest Florida community, we're aware of Grace Place and the work that they do with families that are in need. They are desperately in need of resources at this time to help feed the families that are going there and to provide resources for the children who they engage with. Certainly would encourage people to consider making donations or helping out at Grace Place at this time. I want to thank all of those who are in our audience, who are watching or listening to the One Spark at a Time with me, Rabbi Adam Miller. If you missed any part of our experience today or want to watch other episodes, know that the full videos are available at the Temple Shalom of Naples YouTube channel and are also available as podcasts on Apple or your favorite podcast provider. Just look up One Spark at a Time. Friends, as we finish today, I would share with you the text from Gandhi. Be the change you want to see in the world. Know that following your passion, following your inspiration, you too have the power to fix our broken world, one spark at a time.